Hilchos Tumas Meis, Perik Sheni. Now in the first period, the Rambam discussed that a mess is metame b'magel b'masu b'oil. He discussed what constitutes masa, that can be masa beis astor, can be maga beis astorim, and masa could be masa beis astorim, and also the masa also includes hesed, and also what's an oil, the three ways that an oil is metame, varies the pratim in the maga, masa, and oil, and also that a mess has to be mamish mess. Because even if it's a goyses and you have nishkash nei simonim, he doesn't have a din mess, achiyomus mamish. Here the Rambam is going to discuss various dinim of the mess, which when is it matame, what parts of the mess is matame, and what kind of tumas does it impart. That's the Rambam is going to discuss in the next two prokim. Perik Sheni, hanefel. Hanefel is an undeveloped child, a child that obviously didn't develop to become a child to be able to be alive. And sometimes you can have a nefel that's already developed. In other words, the gashmis already has ivarim, but it didn't develop to the full extent. And memele, it was a miscarriage. Then there could be a metzias of a nefel, which is betchilas, right? In other words, after 40 days, the child is considered a nefel. That's the din. In other words, after 40 days of conception, the child is considered a nefel. So that nefel at that point in time, doesn't have the formulation of the limbs. The formulation of the limbs comes through the gidim, various gidim, which causes the iskashrus of the ivarim. So as hanefel, aval pisha adayin lein niskashru ever of the gidin, the ivarim didn't become formulated with the gidin, with the sinews. Nevertheless, mitame b'maga b'maso b'oil. So that nefel is mitame with all the three tumas, b'maga b'maso b'oil, ka'odam gadol shemes, as if he would be an adam gadol, even though his mamish just now beginning to develop. He didn't develop yet. Nevertheless, the nefel has the din of a mess. Shenemar hanigeh b'mes l'chol nefesh adam. So we learn out any filu kol nefesh adam, even a nefel is also metame. That's din number one. Din number two, v'chein kizayis mipsara mess. If you have a mess, and from that mess you have a kizayis of basar, so kizayis mipsara mess is also ben lach ben yovish kecheres. Even it's already dried out, is metame kines sholem. So that's another din that a kizayis min abasar is also metame kines sholem. Then the Ram continues, v'hanotzel, the basar, notzel of the basar, is also metame b'kazayis. Now what's notzel? Ezohu notzel. A basar shnimeach, the basar became, decomposed, and v'nasa leichas rucha, and that basar became leichas rucha, it became liquidy, which is not saruach liquid. But that's only shetikrash oiser alecha hanimtzas min hames. In order to establish that this is the leichas rucha which actually came from the mess, we have to have that leichas rucha should congeal. She'im karsha, if that leichas rucha congealed and it was a mess, gives out this leichas rucha. The question is the leichas rucha from what part of the mess is it coming from? Is it coming from the basar, or maybe a different part of the mess, maybe some part of the stomach of the mess, something that was in the stomach? So in order to establish that this leichas rucha that's coming out of this mess is actually min habasar, so if it congeals, v'yodu hashim mipsari, and v'imlei karsha, and if it doesn't congeal, eina metame, it's not metame, maybe it's part of the liquids, which was in his nose or in his mouth. Those liquids which are not the psara mess is nachabal. So we're learning over here. First we learned is that a nefel is metame even kemes shalom, even though it was liniskasher ever begin. That's din number one. The Mishnah gave the size of the nefel. Then they were learning that a basar mipsar hames is also metame b'maga b'masu. It's metame kemes. And then we're learning also that the notzel of the basar, the notzel, which is the leichas rucha that comes from the basar, is also metame. But we have to establish that this notzel is leichas rucha, which is coming from a mess. And how do we establish that? If that leichas rucha congeals, so then we know that this leichas rucha is coming from a mess. If it didn't congeal, so the Rambam doesn't say that he's a suffik tummy. The Rambam just says, "V'mlei karsha eina metame, koshem mekichi v'niyu." But l'chur it's a suffik tumah. So on that, the Mishnah Melech says, no, that the Talach Levesh Misinai that said that Netzel is considered Metame is only in Vade Netzel. But if it's a Suffolk Netzel, so then it's Takanat Metame. It's not some Suffolk Metame. If it's a Suffolk Netzel, it's Mechazgila not Metame. It's a Chidush. That's Loshna Rambam, V'mlei Karsha, Eina Metame, Koshem Mekiche V'nihu, and then it's Takanat Metame. Halacha Beis. Aval Bisha Shiurim Kulon Halacha Levesh Misinayim. So the Chura was saying that Kazayis min hames, that's considered the shir that's metame. Abalepel amru chachamim that there's a havana to this din because tchilas briyas shalom kizayas when a person first starts being formulated. So the beginning of the formulation of a person, obviously by the conception, that's not yet a kizayas. But when the conception turns into the tchilas briyas shalom, when the person starts formulating, so that's when at that point in time Chazal tell us that it's a kizayas. And as a result of that, is shir tumas psari kizayis. So therefore, the shir tumas psari is kizayis. Whereas kizayis is the minimal amount, which is tchilas briyas shalom. Halakha gimel. Aver shenechtach min ha'odam achai. If an aver was cut off of a live person, says harehu kemes shalom. So that aver has the din of a mess. So that aver min achai is metame b'maga b'masu be'el. And afilo aver cotton shalom yema. Even we're talking about a very small aver, which comes from a very small, from a ben yemis. So the aver is a very small, from a very small child. Nevertheless, it's a mamish a very small amount. Nevertheless, that aver is metame b'mago b'masu be'el. She'ivarim ein lem shir. There's no shir, there's no side. We said the basar is a shir of a kazayas, but ivarim ein lem shir. Shinam, we learn it out from a pasuk. The pasuk says v'chila sheyigal pnei asada b'chalal cherev. And someone that's a corpse from a cherev. Now, v'adavar yedua shedin chalal cherev kedin chalal eved chalal shardvar. If the person has died, so it makes no difference how he died. Did he die with a sword? Did he die in any other way? So why is the pasuk saying b'chalal cherev? Piashmol lamdus. Chazal teach us that the pasuk is telling us sheli bozeh. What is the pasuk teaching us? Elilatami negeh be'aver shepultas yacherev. Whereas chalal cherev, someone that died by a sword, it means that something was cut off through a sword. The aver was severed through a sword, even if the person is still alive. The person was still alive, but the aver was severed from through a sword. So memela, that aver is metame kimes shalom. Now, b'med dvarim amurim, that the aver of a chai is metame kimes shalom, kshehoya aver shalom kibriyasi. It was complete, like kibriyasi, like it's created. Basar v'gidim v'atzomis. It has tzag basar, flesh, and gidim and sinews and atzomis. Shnamar eba etzem adam. So we learn out etzem shuhuka adam. We learn out etzem shuhuka adam. What's etzem shuhuka adam? Ma adam is basar v'gidim v'atzomis. Is af evim menachai achiyeh kibriyasi. Basar v'gidim v'atzomis. So this din that an evim menachai is metami kimes is only on the condition that it has basar gidim v'atzomis. Aval akulya v'haloshnu kiyetzeben. But if let's say the kidney or the tongue, which is also part an aver of the person, they are a separate part of the person's body, they're a separate limb. Since they have no bone, is arein kishar basar, they have a din of basar, and memela there's no din of basar menachai. We'll learn that basar menachai is not metame. Basar menachai is not metame. So aver menachai is metame. So memela arein kishar basar. Chaser min ha'etzem shel aver kolshu. If this aver menachai that had etzem basar v'gidim, basar gidim v'atzomis, and missing a little piece of this etzem, a small amount, a minimal amount of this etzem, is a aver kulitor. In order for an aver menachai to be matame, it has to be that it's not missing any etzem. However, chasim mipsari, if this aver menachai was missing mipsari, is a nisharal of basar, sheroy lalus be'arucha b'chai. There's enough flesh there that if the person would be alive, so this aver would be able to regenerate, and memela the flesh would regenerate, and it would be able to heal itself. V'yisrape v'yishleim, it'll heal himself, and it'll come back. So then is metame b'maga u'b'masa be'el. In love, if not, is metame b'maga u'b'masa ve'enei metame be'el. Is nachamol. An aver menachai is metame b'maga u'b'masa be'el. Aver menachai means an aver basar gidim v'atzomis. It has to be basar gidim v'atzomis. If it's an aver without basar gidim v'atzomis, it's not metame. Now, if it's missing any part of the etzem of this aver menachai, it's not metame at all. However, if it's missing the basar, so it depends. If this basar, there's enough basar there, which could cause the rest of the basar to regenerate the part that's missing, to come back, to heal itself. So then it's metame again b'magu b'masu be'el. If, however, there's not enough basar for it to regenerate, so there's the Eva Menachai, which is basar and the gidim and the etzem, but the etzem is not missing anything. but on the other end, there's not enough basar to be able for it to heal itself. So then it's metame b'magu b'masa ve'eni metame be'el. It's not metame be'el. Now, basar ha'perish menachai, basar which is perish menachai. So till now we spoke about ever ha'perish menachai. Basar ha'perish menachai is tor. Basar ha'perish menachai is tor b'chlal. V'chein etzem b'lei basar ha'perish menachai. If you just have etzem that came out of a chai and there was no basar at all, so it's also tor. So we're learning an ever menachai is metame. If it's basar gidim v'atzomis, if it's missing any part of the etzem, it's not metame at all. Basar menachai is not metame at all. Aver menachai, which is missing basar, so it depends. If there's enough basar for it to heal itself, so then it's a regular aver menachai and metame b'maga b'masu u'ba'oil. Masha'enkin, if there's not enough for it to generate, so then it's only metame b'maga b'masa, but not ba'oil, not ba'oil. Now the din is that an etzem, which is kiseira, is metame b'magu b'masa, not ba'il. Now we just learned that if you have an aver that has an etzem, but lepel it's missing from the basar and it doesn't have enough kedei lehisrape la'lahalis aruka, so it's metame only b'magu b'masa. The question is, does this etzem, which knows we have an aver minachai that has an etzem, there's nothing missing from the etzem, and it's missing from the basar, there's not enough basar in order to get healed, and we're saying that this aver is metam b'magu b'masa, is it being metam b'magu b'masa because it has an etzem kaseira, because an etzem kaseira is also metam b'magu b'masa, without being an aver. So the mashmois of Rambam, the way the Medayik is, that the Rambam holds not like that. The Rambam holds you don't need to have it, should be an etzem kaseira now, in order for it to be metam. In other words, even if this aver menachai, which is missing the basar, is missing the basars to la'alis aruka, and therefore it's not metame ba'oil, and it's metame b'magu b'masa. So this din metame b'magu b'masa is a new din. Since it's an aver menachai, it's an aver, so einachinami, it's missing basar, so therefore it loses that mila of being metame ba'oil, or that tumah that's metame ba'oil, but on the other end it still has a tumah of magu b'masa, not because because the etzem is an etzem kaseira. It's a new din. It's a din mitzad, because since we have this etzem, and this since we have the etzem and we have the basar and the einochinami, there's not enough basar la'alas haruka, but it was an ever menachai, so the ever menachai gives it a new din that it's metame b'magu b'masa. That's l'chura de pshat. Halacha dalet. Ever haperish min hames. Till now we spoke about halacha. We spoke about an ever haperish min hachai. Ever haperish min hames is also metame b'magu b'masu be'el kemes. And again, v'hu sheyeh shalom kibriyase should be basar v'gidav atzomis. So this divided is the same din. Basar eva maperish menachai, eva perish menames. Either way, it's metame b'magu b'masu be'el. If it's shalom kibriyase, basar yigidin v'atzomis. Now chaser atzmei. Now what happens if the etzem is missing? Is a nishral of basar kizayis. If there's a basar kizayis, is the metame kimes shalom, because a basar kizayis from a mess is also metame kimes. In the previous case where we were talking about eva menachai, so you can't be metame beside the basar. Because basar menachai is not metame. Over here we're talking about basar menames. So therefore, nishal of basar kizayis metame kimes shalom. Now chaser basar, if the basar is missing, and v'lei chaser etzem, there's nothing missing of the etzem, so we have again an eva menachai, and we're missing from the basar. It is nishal of kidei lalas haruka b'chai is metame kimes shalom. That's the same like an eva menachai, just like an eva menachai if it's missing from the basar, but it's enough kidei lalas haruka b'chai, so memela it's metame. Kimes shalom, so that is even when a mess is no less. V'im lav, if there's not enough basar for it to be nisrape, if it would be chai, so then it's areu kishar atzmis hamesim. So then it has a din of kishar atzmis hamesim she'ein aleihim basar, and the din is l'chura atzmis hamesim need to have a kiseira. That's l'chura the pshat. So over here the Rambam is saying again. So we're talking about an aver min hames. We spoke about it before with aver min hachai. Now we're talking about aver min hames. So the Rambam is saying an aver min hames. If it's an aver shalom, so it's metam b'magu b'masu be'el. If it's missing its estim, so Mela loses any dinim of being an aver min hames. But however, it has a din if it's basar. If there's a basar kizayis, so then it has a din of basar min hames. Basar min hames is metam b'kizayis. If it's missing basar, if this aver min hames is missing basar, so again, if it's yeshbei kidei lalis aruka, so then it has a din of an aver min hames, just like an aver min hachai. Melis metam b'magu b'masu be'el. if it doesn't have Kedei Lalas Aruka, so then it has a din of Atzmis Hames, She'ein Aleim Basar, and L'chura has a regular din of Etzem. Now the question is, we were medayik before that in Lashon Rambam in Halacha Gimel, by an Aver Min Hachai, it seems to be saying that if it's missing Basar, and it's not enough Kedei Lalas Aruka, so it's Matame B'magu B'masa, not because of the din Etzem, the regular din Etzem, of Etzem Keseir. What would happen if you have this Aver would have less than an Etzem Keseir? It would also be Matame B'magu B'masa. So l'chura, how could it be that an Aver Min Hames has less din Tumah than an Aver Min Hachai? L'chura, it's very hard to understand such a thing. That an Aver Min Hachai, if it's missing Basar, so as long as the Etzem is still intact, even if it's not the size of a Seira, so it's Matame B'magu B'masa. And by an Aver Min Hames, then it has to be Matame Dafka, Ka'atzmis Hamesim, and Memela it has to be Kaseira. That's the Ha'ara in Pshat over here between Halacha Gimel and Halacha Dalet. So the Rambam brings over here that Be'emes it's for sure that Atzmis Hames also, since it was an Aver Min Hames, so even though if it's missing Basar, so Lepeil is Matame B'magu B'masa, even if it's not an Etzem Kaseira. When it says over here at the end of the Lashon, Vim Lav Hareu Kish'ar Atzmis Hamesim She'ein Aleim Basar, it means when is the Nazir Megaleach Aleim? The Nazir is Megaleach Aleim only when it has an Etzem Kaseir. It's not so glatik Pshat. That's how the Rambam says Pshat in this halacha. But l'chura, the glatik Pshat, l'chura, the Rambam is mentioning the fact that it's Metame as an Aver. So you have to understand, is Nachamol. In Halacha Gimel, it seems to be saying that an Aver Min Hachai, even if it's missing Basar, so Memela it doesn't have a din like a Mes Sholim. But lefachis it has a din that is Matam B'magu B'masa, regardless if it has an Etzem Kaseira. And here the Rambam seems to be saying by an Aver Min Hames, when it doesn't have enough Basar, so then it has a din of an Etzem. And Mela over there, the din is you have to have an Etzem Kaseira, which is sort of beer. What should be the din? The Rambam says also that later on the Rambam clearly says that even by an Aver Min Hames, even if it doesn't have an Etzem Kaseira, it's also Chayiv. It's also considered Matam B'magu B'masa. Just maybe parenthetically, just say a story that there was a shaila, there was a shaila that was in the Seder when a person, there was a kohen that Nebuch Nishvakein Gedacht lost a finger fell off, it cut off a finger, and the doctors wanted to reconnect the finger to his body. Now that finger was an Aver Min Hachai, so the finger was matame, and the operating room was obviously in under a roof. Maybe he was in an oil. So the question is, could he be together in one oil with this Aver Min Hachai, which is his finger, in order for this finger to be reunited with him? He's a kohen. So there was a shaila about it. So the Pashtus Advarim is, I'm just saying here in the Rambam, is Pashut, that if the Aver Min Hachai is missing anything of the Etzem, even a drop of the Etzem, so it's no longer Metami, it's Aver Min Hachai. So Memela, if you take over, the doctor takes off a little bit of the Etzem, but he's going to have to take off an Etzem, or so if you have a finger, the actual finger is really 3 Avarim. So the Mishnah says, we'll learn later, that the hand is 30 Avarim. In other words, each bone is a separate Aver. So you'll have to scratch off a little bit of each of the bones of that finger, and only then you could reunite it, and then there's no problem, because the Kain is not becoming tummy from that Aver, because that Aver is not Matami. Halacha Hey. Moyach shebeteich ha'etzem, the marrow which is in the bone, is also harehu ma'ila rukim b'machutz. That also causes the bone to heal from the outside. Lefichach kulyas hames. The mess, there's a kulyas hames. What's a kulyas? V'hu the Ram teaches uis etzem hasotzum mishnei ktzei. So if you have a bone that's closed from both sides, there's nothing around the bone. There's just the bone. It has the marrow inside. Is in yesh b'teichem meach kedei lalis aruka. If in that kulyas, that bone, there's enough marrow which will cause that this bone should heal, that the flesh around the bone, which should normally be around the bone, could regenerate. So then it's harezek masholim. So this bone has a din of a masholim. However, hoyeba meach hamisnadnit, if it had over there meach, there was marrow which was already shaking. In other words, it was obviously not healthy marrow. So then it depends. So then we assume that it's not enough kedei lahalas aruka if it's misnadnit. So then in yesh b'kezayis, if the marrow, there's a kezayis of marrow in this bone, is again is a reason Matami Ba'il. It's Matami Ba'il. Aval Bisha had some sosim called Stodov, even though this marrow is closed within the bone, but nevertheless, Tuma because Ve'ila because Ve'yeredis, Kmishi is Bar. The Tuma goes out of the bone, and knows the basar, which is in the bone, that's Matami. And the fact that it's in a bone doesn't change anything. And therefore, if this bone is in an oil or wherever, so so Tuma because Ve'ila because Ve'yeredis. Shameach ki basar l'chol davar, the marrow has a din of basar. So that's this din. So we learned about the din of an Aver min achai, and also b'negei an Aver min hames. Aver min hames. Halacha vav. Ha'aver va'basar ha'meduldolim ba'adam. You have an Aver, a limb or flesh, which are meduldolim, they're limply hanging from a person. In other words, they're still connected to the body, but on the other end, they're not connected properly. They're only dangling from the person. They could never really become reattached to the body and become properly become part of the body, is Torah. Nevertheless, they're Torah. So in other words, obviously, a basar min achai is always Torah. Even if they're completely severed, the basar would be Torah. And the Aver min achai would be Matami, but over here it doesn't have a din of an Aver min achai, because since it's fart connected, so therefore it doesn't have a din min achai. It doesn't have a din of Aver min achai. Now, Mesod, now the person died. So on one end we said that since it was somewhat connected, it didn't have a din like Eva min achai. But on the other end, since Lepel, it wasn't really properly connected, so now when the mess dies, we're not going to say that this thing now is falling off a mess, because it's really not a mess. Because Lepel, it was never really part of this, it wasn't properly part of this body before the body died. So Memela, we're not going to call it an Aver min achai while he was alive, because Sof Kol Sef he was connected. But on the other end, now that the person died, we're not going to call it that it's Basar min hames or Aver min hames. And therefore, Mesa Adam is already a Basar Tor. The Basar is Tor because we're not going to call it Basar that's coming from a mess, because it was already detached, so to speak, while he was alive, and it wasn't really possible for it to be properly attached. And also, V'aver is Matam Mishum Aver min achai. We're not going to call the Aver an Aver min hames. We're calling the Aver Aver min achai, and therefore, V'aini Matam Mishum Aver min hames. He's not going to be Matam Mishum Aver min hames. He's only Matam Mishum Aver min achai. So in other words, again, so we have this Aver and this Basar, which is Medul Dalim. So on one hand, while the person's alive, we're not saying that this thing is completely severed, and therefore we'll give it a din of Aver min achai, and it's Matam Mishum Aver min achai. It's not Matam Mishum Aver min achai. Because the lapel, it's still connected. But on the other hand, once it dies, once the person dies, we're not going to say, well, so since we're saying we didn't give it an Aver min achai, so basically it was part of him, so now it's an Aver min hames. No, he's not an Aver min hames, because since he was severed from him while he was chai, so therefore we're not going to call him an Aver min hames, and al derech we're not going to call the basar a basar min hames. And therefore the basar won't be matami. The basar won't be matami, and the Aver won't be matami al Aver min hames. It'll rather be matami al Aver min achai. Now, ma being Aver min achai Aver min hames. What's the difference? Either way, Aver min achai is matami, and Aver min hames is matami. The answer is Aver min achai is basar aperish mimenu, or ve'etzem aperish mimenu teir. Those Aver min achai is be'emes only matami al an Aver. An Aver min achai cannot be matami not al an etzem, and not al basar. It could only be matami al an etzem, al an Aver. And b'meila Aver min achai is basar aperish menu, and ve'etzem aperish menu steir. However, ve'Aver min hames is basar aperish menu, basar which is perish from Aver min hames, and al derech etzem aperish menu is kiperish min hames hashalom, and therefore matam b'shiurim. So in other words, an etzem min hames is matami kiseira. Now, if you have an Aver min hames, and that Aver min hames you took off a piece of etzem, and that etzem was the size of a seder, it also be matami kiseira, because that's an etzem min hames. It doesn't have to be matami, it's an Aver min hames. There's a din of Aver min hames, and Aver min hames has no shear, and b'meila is matami mas be'el without a shear. But but on the other hand, if it's an Aver min hames, it can be matami the basar that comes off this Aver, and al derech the etzem comes off this Aver. Mashenk in the Aver min achai, it could only be matami al an Aver. It can't be matami al basar, and it can't be matami al etzem. Halacha zayin, u'bein Aver min achai, bein Aver min hames, ein lam shir. There's the din of shiurim. There's an etzem has a shir, the basar has a shir, but an Aver has no shir, whether it's an Aver min achai or an Aver min hames, as long as it's Aver kibriyasi, which is mean basar gidim vatzoms. It has no shir. Amru chachamim, masayim shmeina varboim Averim yesh beish. A man has 248 avarim. An avar means the little bones. In other words, for example, the hand has 30 avarim because each bone is considered a separate avar. So Masayim Shmeina Barboim Avrim Yesh Ba'odam Kol Echad Ve'echad Mem Basar V'Gidim Ve'etzem. Ve'ina Shenayim and Aminya, the teeth aren't part of the cheshbon because the teeth don't have Basar V'Gidim. U'Be'isha, a woman has Masayim Ve'echad Ve'Chamishim. A woman has 251, 3 extra. Now, called Aver Mem Shapirish Kibriyasi, any of these Avarim that were separated, Kibriyasi, Beiman Achai, Beiman Ames, is Matami B'Mago B'Masu Be'el, like we learned. Chutz, except Mishleisha Avarim Yisera Shebe'isha. The 3 extra Avarim that a woman has, She'ena Matam Be'el. We learn now from the Pasuk, Adam Kiyomus Be'el, so it has to be a person, knows a type of Aver which every person has. Mashenka, those Avarim which are Miyuchad Le'isha are not included in those dinim of Tumas Eil, of Tumas Eil. She'ena Matam Be'el. So they're only Matami B'Mago B'Masa U'Nachmo. Except for Chutz Mishleisha Yivarim Yisera Shebe'isha, She'ena Matam Be'el. They're not Matam Be'el. The Rambam doesn't teach clearly that they're Matam B'Mago B'Masa, but it's brought down from Tesus that Tesus teaches clearly that Matam B'Mago B'Masa. V'chein Etzba Yisera Sheyesh Ba Etzem Ve'ein Ba Tziperin. If a person has an extra finger, and that finger has a bone, but it doesn't have a nail on it, the finger doesn't have a nail. So then it depends. Im Nisperes Al Gabi Yad, which means it's part of the person who has 5 fingers. So he has the 6th finger, and that 6th finger is in the same row of the 5 fingers. So if you count the fingers one after the other, so you have the 6th finger, which has no tziperin. So it's oilo l'minyan revei varim. That's oilo l'minyan revei varim. The din is, we'll learn by Hemshech, that b'chlal and etzem is matami keseira. Now, in order for an etzem to be matami also, the oil is only in certain conditions, and one of the conditions are, one possibility is, that if you have the reiv minyanim of the bones, if most of the bones of the person's body is under the oil, so then those bones are matame oil. Now what it means, most of the bones, so a person has 248 bones, so most of the bones would mean 125 bones. Now if this, if you have this etzba yisera, which also has a bone, so this etzba yisera with the bone is also eil l'minyan reiv varim. That's part of the minyan. Whereas that bone is there, so that also is added to the misper of 125 bones, or whatever the number would be. So the din is this etzba yisera sheyesh ba'etzem ve'emes sipayris im disperes al gabayat eil minyan reiv varim. And bepashtus for sure it's betame b'magu b'masu be'eil on its own. That's what it says. The Ram doesn't say it clearly. The Ram doesn't teach it clearly. That's Rashi and Tesis and Pcheres say, as the Ramora brings. But lechura, that's the pashtus advarim. It's even mitzdarif to be matame b'oil. So certainly on its own, it's matame b'mago b'masu lechura. However, v'meina nisperes al gabe hayat, we're dealing with an extra finger that doesn't have a tziperin, So then, and it's also eina nisperes al gabe hayat, is matame b'mago b'masa, and v'eina matame b'oil. And the Tumas Meis Sefer. So we see even if it's Ein in the Nisperes Al Gabeyad, it's Matam Mago B'Masa. So the Chura Koshkin, if it's in the Nisperes Al Gabeyad, if it's in the Nisperes Al Gabeyad, and the Tumas is Meis Sefer. So this Tumah, the Emes, it's not really an Aver. So therefore, it shouldn't be Matam. But Lepel Midrabanon, this finger, which has an Etzem, it doesn't have a Tziperin, and it's not in the Nisperes Al Gabeyad, is Matam Mago Masa Midrabanon. That's talking about if it doesn't have a tziperin. However, if this finger, this extra finger had a tziperin, it's arei kisharei varim, it has a din like sharei varim. So it's not so clear what would be the difference. In other words, bepashtus it means whether it's nisperis or it's not nisperis. Whereas, is there really enough communal bepeil between an etzba yisera sheyesh be'etzem and doesn't have a tziperin, and it's nisperis al gabe yad, as opposed to an etzba which has a tziperin? Not clear about that. I'll quote part of the Rambam is saying that there's 248 Ivarim by a man, a woman has 251 Ivarim, the 248 Ivarim, which are equal by a man and a woman, so over there they are Matami B'Mago B'Masu B'Oil, that's the number 1. The 3 Ivarim which the woman has extra is not Matami B'Oil, is only Matami B'Mago B'Masa. If a person has an extra finger, so if that finger doesn't have a tziperin, and it's Nisperis Al Gabe Ayad, so then it's matame, it's starif l'minyan revei varim. Pashtus is also matame b'mago b'masa. If it's not nisperes al gabe yad, when it doesn't have a tziperin, so then it's only mitam b'mago b'masa, not be'el, and that tum is only midrabanan. And now we're learning that if it does have a tziperin, so then it's kishar heivorim. That's kishar heivorim. The chura means it's mitam b'mago b'masa be'el, and it's also the chura elu minyan heivorim. Now mipnima gozer tuma al etzba she'ein nisperes. Why did the gezer tuma on this etzba she'ein nisperes when it doesn't have a tziperin? Because gzeira mishum nisperes. Because the gzeira mishum nisperes, you're afraid if you'll be matire this finger, you might be matire a different finger. Or another, you'll be matire an extra finger, which is yen nisperes. So therefore, they instituted that even if it's ein nisperes, you want an extra finger. An ein nisperes should be matam b'mago b'masa. And v'lama leitemur ba'el. Why didn't they give it also a din of tumas meis? Because asula heker kedei lehidia shetumasa midivreim mishum gzeira. Kedei shel yisruv al tumasa truma v'kachin. So in the Rambam itself, it's clearly the Rambam is saying the reason why they gave an etzba she'ein in the speres. We're talking about an etzba without a tziperin. An etzba she'ein in the speres without a tziperin. They gave it a din of tumas maga b'masa. Is because gzeira mishum nisperes. If it's nisperes, so then it's for sure matami b'maga b'masa be'el. Let's give it also a din of tumas eil in order to be equal to the din of nisperes. The answer is no. In order to be clear that it's a din d'Rabbanan, and therefore they shouldn't burn tum on it. Halacha ches. Now atzmis hames she'ein aleim basar. If you now have only atzomis and there's no basar, so imni keres bem tzuras atzomis. If it's obvious that we're dealing with atzomis of a person, it knows it's nicker on the etzem that it's a tzura of atzomis, is harei lumetamin b'maga u'b'masa b'maga u'b'masa u'b'eil k'meshol. So these atzomis are also mitamin b'maga b'masa b'eil k'meshol shani keribem etzem odom. So an etzem odom, it's an etzem which you could see that it's an etzem odom. Now, not all atzomis, snapshot. He's just saying, b'chlal, in order for atzomis to be metame, b'mago, b'maso, b'eil, it has to be, first of all, etzem, which you could see that it's an etzem of an odom. Ve'elu heinu atzomis, shehi metame kemes. Now, these are the atzomis which are metame kemes. What are the atzomis which are metame kemes? Is hashidra. If you have the spine, there's all the discs, all the bones of the spine, and the hagulgelis, and the skull, and also v'reiv binyone, the most of the structure of the person's body, as we'll soon see, and also v'reiv binyone, or if you have most of the bones of the person, so then it'll be matam be'el. Is again, in order for bones to be matam be'el, it is in one of four ways. Either you have the spine, or hashidra, or you have hagulgelis, which is the skull, or you have reiv binyone, you have most of the structure of the body, the skeleton of the body, and also v'reiv minyoni, or you have most of the bones. Now the Ram teaches us a shidra ketzad. What does it mean, the shidra, that you have a complete shidra? Shidra ketzad, shidra shishleim, if you have a complete spine, harei kimes shalom. If it's missing even one of the vertebrae, is harei kishara atzomus, or has it been like bones, and then we count it according to how we count bones. There's a certain shear of bones that could also be metame b'mes, but it doesn't already have the special din of the shedra. Hagulgelis ketzad, what does it mean, the skull? Gulgelis sheishleim, if you have a complete skull, is harei kimes, it has din of a mes. There's no flesh, there's only bone, but since it's a complete skull, so therefore it has din of a mes. The mchseira kesela, if there's missing from the skull the size of a sela, is harei kishara atzomus, so it loses its special din of being a skull, and mela has a din of bones. Now, if it had small holes in it, none of the holes were a sela, but kulam it's starful like a sela. If you put the holes together, and it'll be the size of a sela, so then that hole is already again to make this skull not into a skull, and memela it has a din like bones. That's been again. So we had the din of the shedra, and we had the din of the gulgelis. Now we also said the reiv binyani shalodim. So he says as a kol binyani shalodim, the structure of a person. We learned that the reiv of the structure of a person is also betami be'oil. Kol binyani shalodim hushtei hashikayim is the two shins, vayirichayim and the hips, vatzlois and the ribs, and vashedra and the spine. And v'reiv shel bani shel mes, if you have most of the binyani shel mes, is hareu k'mes shalom, so it has the din of a mes shalom. As long as you have most of the binyani shel mes, ketzad. Kigen, you have shtei shekel, you have the two shins, and v'yerech echas, and one hip. So then, So that has a din of reiv binyani. That's considered reiv binyani shulmas. Im chaser reiv binyani kol shu. If it's missing reiv binyani, knows you don't have said. If you have two sheikah v'yerach achas, that's called reiv binyani. If you're missing part of those three things that you just said, so then is arei in kishar atzomas. Then it has a din like other bones, and then we have to measure how many bones there are and what the size of the bones, as we'll see in Behemshach. Then there's a fourth option, which is reiv minyani. Most of the bones, most reiv minyani cases, reiv minyan atzomas kin shehoyu meya chamisha v'esrim etzem. There were 125 bones. Is harei l'kemeshol. That's also considered kemeshol. Hoyu meya arba v'esrim. If there was 124 bones, is harei in kishar atzomas. Then they have a din of regular bones, and then it's not necessarily matam beil unless it has the shear. Now, aval pisha hoya adam zer yesebei varav, v'chesebei varav. In other words, when we speak about most of the bones, we don't look at this person. We say, how many bones did he have? If this person was missing a leg or was missing an arm, so his avi was missing bones. So we don't look at this person. How many bones did he have? Aval pisha hoya adam zer yesebei varav. He had maybe extra bones. V'chesebei varav. Emash gichin ela al minyan reiv koladim. When we see with minyan reiv koladim, and most people have 248. So therefore, we say 248 bones. Ella. If he had an etzba sheyesh b'tzipein, oy shehoyse nesperes al gabe yad. So now you had an extra finger, and that finger was either nesperes al gabe yad or had tzipein, even if it wasn't nesperes al gabe yad. Shehi eila leminyan k'meshim b'yarno. So then it is eila leminyan, and then you have to have most, including that. In other words, that bone is also considered. So the pashas, when a person has agam l'chura, most people don't have this bone. But the pasha is coming out that if a person has, let's say, he has an extra finger, so maybe he doesn't have 248 bones, he has 249 bones. So l'chura, 125 bones would also still be reiv minyani. But if you have two extra fingers, so if you have two extra fingers, so then he has 250 bones. So then the pasha, it comes out that 125 bones won't be reiv minyani of this person. Won't be reiv minyani of this person. Halacha tes shar atzmis hames she'ein bem reiv minyan v'lei reiv binyan v'lei shidra shleima v'lei gulgela shleima. We learned that there was four options, four ways that the atzomis are metami b'oil. We said either that it's the reiv minyan, there's most of the bones are there, 125 bones, or reiv binyan. We said 2 shikayim and 1 yerichayim, and then there was shedra shleima, a complete shed that had all the vertebrae. And Gulgela Shlema, a complete skull. So if you have other Sha'ar Atzomas HaMash'ein Bem, not the Reiv Minyan, and the Lei Reiv Binyan, and V'lei Shidra Shlema, V'lei Gulgela Shlema. So now there's another din. Im Hoye Ben Reiv HaKav, if there was bones the size of a Reiv HaKav, is Harei Elu V'tamin Kimes, B'mago, B'masu B'el. A Reiv HaKav is really the size of a lug. There's 4 lugim in HaKav. So if it has over there the size of a Reiv HaKav, of bones, so then it's also metam and kemes b'maga or b'maso b'el. However, hoya pachas mereva was less than a reva, then afilu etzem keseira is metam b'maga or b'masa v'eina metam b'el. So it's metam b'maga b'masa, but it's not metam b'el. So an etzem keseira is metam b'maga b'masa. If it's a reva kav, so then it's metam also b'el. And even if it's not a reva kav, as long as it's a gulgelis or a shedra or reiv minyani, so then it's also metam b'el. Halacha Yud, Haya Etzem Echad. So even though we're saying that if it's a Reva Kav, it's Metame Ba'oil, but that's only if it's a Reva Kav made up of a few atzomas, or at least 2 atzomas. Masha'enkin, if there was only 1 etzem, Haya Etzem Echad, Afilu Yesh B'Reva, is Areze Metame B'Mago B'Masa. So in order to Metame B'Mago B'Masa, all it needs is a Seira. And if it's an Etzem Echad, so no matter how big it is, it's also only Metame B'Mago B'Masa. However, if there's more than 1 bone and there's Karev Atzomis, a Rev HaKav rather, so then it's Metame Beil. It's Hareze Metame B'Magu B'Masa Ve'enu Metame Beil. Now Tumas Etzem Echad, this din of a tum of 1 etzem, when it doesn't have even a Rev HaKav, or even if it has a Rev HaKav, but it's an Etzem Echad, is Halacha Mipi HaShmuel. Fi Shenema V'chol HaNegeh Be'etzem, so Lomdu Mipi HaShmuel, what's Pshat V'chol HaNegeh Be'etzem, Afilu Etzem Keseira Metame B'Magu B'Masa. That even if it's an etzem keseda, as long as it's an etzem, so it's metam b'mago b'masa. And vice versa, it's also nichlol that no matter what size it is, it's also b'mago b'masa. Well, the fisha tumasi halacha is areu dinteir v'lei medivri seifrim. The Ram has a cloud that anything that's halacha mesh misina has a din of medivri seifrim. So over here, l'chura the din of a negea be'etzem, of a etzem keseira, is l'chura halacha meish misina. It doesn't say mefurish the din of be'etzem keseira. So the question is, l'chura, if it has a din of b'divrei sefer, so it says no. The pasuk says v'chol negea be'etzem, and the halacha said l'fisha tumasi halacha. The halacha says that the taich of etzem means etzem keseira, so that's nichlal in the pasuk. So Meiler has a din of a din teira v'leim b'divrei sefer. That's l'chura the pshat. It's so clear what the Rambam is trying to say here. The Rambam is saying nachamol that there's a din of an etzem which is mitame ba'oil. That's what we learned till now. And now we're learning that there's a din of a tuma which is only mago b'masa, and that's an etzem echad, even if it's a keseira, and regardless how big it is. And that's, we're learning out from the pasuk of hanegeh be'etzem, and the halacha is saying that hanegeh be'etzem means afilu etzem keseira. Then the Rambam is adding that's lefisha tumasi halacha, so therefore hareu din teira v'leim divrei sefer. Not so clear what's pshat lefisha tumasi halacha, so therefore it's din teira v'leim divrei sefer. Halacha yud aleph. Mes shehirkivu atzmeisav bakever v'naser rokov. So the bones decomposed and they became rokov. Rokov is like a powdery substance. Is molei chofnayim me'esi rokov mitame b'masa u'be'el kemes. And if a person puts his two hands together, that's the chofnayim, the hands full, the two hands full of this rokov from that mess, is mitame b'masa u'be'el kemes. That could be mitame b'masa if you carry a molei chofnayim, a full of the two handfuls of this substance, of this rokov, of the atzomas of the mess, is mitame b'masa u'be'el kemes. B've'eni mitame b'maga. This rokov can be mitame b'maga. Why? The fishiev shaliga b'kula. You know, when you touch something, you have to touch the entire thing. Masha'inker over here, ain't a gufechel. It's a powdery substance. V'afilu gibli b'mayim. But even if you went ahead and put it together with water, it's ain't a chibur. That's not called a chibur. So therefore, you're never really touching all the rokov. So since you're not touching all the rokov, so therefore you can't be matame b'maga. It's just a technical thing, because if it's matame b'masa, it's certainly matame b'maga. But technically, you can't be maga. You can't touch it. So nachamos. So what are we learning again? That a mess which decomposed in the kaver. We'll learn kamadinam b'negeh this din itself later. So and it became rokov. So it's matame b'lei chofnayim. And the b'lei chofnayim is matame b'masu be'el. Halacha yud beis. Dama mes mitame kimes. The dama mes is also mitame mes. So the way that we're learning over here kama pratim b'negea tumas mes. We learned b'negea the eva min achai. We learned first of all we learned about an nefel is mitame min mes, and then we learned an eva min achai, and the eva min mes is mitame min mes, and then we learned about basar, which basar kizayis is mitame min mes, and then we learned about the atzomis. When is the atzomis mitame min mes? When is the atzomis mitame min mes with mago masa? When is mitame min mes also Tumas Eil? And now we're learning about that there's a mitzvah that the etzem became rokov, is also mitame mes. And now we're learning the din of dama mes. Halacha yud beis. Dama mes mitame kimes b'mago b'masu be'el. Shnemer b'nefesh adam and v'nemer ki adam hu nefesh. So maybe we learn out that nefesh adam refers to the dam. So we learn up pshat in the pasuk that if there's a person becomes tummy to dam, the kama shiuri, how much is the shir? Revius. Afilu tamtzis adam. Afilu tamtzis adam. Sometimes when you have water dam standing, so there's liquid like coming out of the thickness of the dam. There's coming out like liquid which doesn't have that thickness, that substance of the dam. But nevertheless, if that liquid is still red, it's not clear, it's red. Afilu tamtzis adam. Kol zman sheyesh be'admunis. If that liquid that's coming out of the dam has admunis, is also mitame ba'oil kimes. Is mitame ba'oil kimes. Now that's dam mes, that dam came out of the mess. Now dam achai, the blood that comes out of a live person, afilu dam nechira, if a person was stabbed in the throat, and mainly he's dying from that dam, but l'peil, this dam is coming out while he's still alive, is areza tor kolzman shuchai, as long as he was alive, so that dam is not mitami. This arev hadam shiyotzi menu bachreina, somach l'misa, im adam shiyotzi menu achar shemes, and his blood came out towards the end, while he was still alive. And then blood continued coming out when he died. And v'chol ha'tarevis revius, and this whole mixture is only a revius. So some of the blood came out while he was alive, and some of the blood came out when he died. Ve'en yodua kama yotz michayim v'kama yotz achar misa. Afilu chatzi revius michayim v'chetzi achar misa. So harei ze nikra dam tfus. So that mixture of the blood that partially came out Michayim and partially came out Mimisa, and it's not clear how much came out Michayim or how much came out Mimisa, so that's called Dam Tvusa, Umetami B'mago B'maso B'eil Elishitamasim Devri Sefer. So Dam Tvusa is Metami B'dirabbanan, it's blood that was mixed, the blood that came out while he was dying, before he died, right before he died, while he was dying, and the blood that came out after he died. And that mixture is called Dam Tvusa, and there's a kazayas of that mixture, a revius of that mixture, so it's obviously not a revius of Dam Hames, but nevertheless it's Metami Midrabon. Halacha Yudalit. Harug Shahoya Mutal Alamita. Someone that was killed, and he was lying on a bed, V'dami Menatev Kshu Chai, while he was still alive, the blood was flowing from him, and V'yered Leguma was coming down into a hole which was under the bed, near the bed. Umes, and then he died. Vari Adam Menatev Achar Meisei, V'yered Leise Guma, and the blood continued dripping after he died, and it was also coming down into that Guma. So then the din is Arikol Adam Shebotor. The entire dam, which is in that Guma, even though some of it came out before he died, some of it came out after he died, it's all Torah. Shetipa Rishena Botla B'dam Sheyotz Michayim. Because since there was blood that came out Michayim, and they were just dripping the blood that came out of Lachar Misa, so every drop of blood that came into that mixture became bottle, and mainly, even though later on many more drops came, but we say Kama bottle. That's talking about a case where we know the pashtus that there was blood that came out Michayim, and then there was drops of blood that came out Lachar Misus, even though those drops may have been many drops. But Lepel, since it was tipa, kama bottle, so regardless of how much came in to that gum, it all became bottle, memel, it's not metame. Now, Yotza Mimen, you have a mess, which Yotza Mimen, the Revius Dam Belvad. You only have a Revius Dam that came out of this mess. And the Sofik Kula Michayim, Sofik Kula Lachar Misa. We don't know when it actually came out. So the din is Harezu Sofik Tumah Kishara Sveikas. It has the din of a Sofik Tumah Kishara Sveikas, and therefore Vahanigea B'Rishus Hayochid Tumah, B'Rishus Haram Tur K'Mishri Yizbar B'Kemi. So there's here you have a Sofik. You don't know when this dam came out. If it came out Michayim, it came out Lachar Misa. If this dam is Matame, or the dam is not Matame. So the Mela, so it depends. If it's a Rishus Hayochid, so we have the rule Sveiki Tumah, and a Rishus Haram Sveiki Tur. So this Rambam Be'emes is a Klora Rambam L'chura that says that the din of Safik Tum Rishus Hayochid is also, if you have a mitzias of something, you don't know if it was tummy or not, you don't know if it was tummy or not, and you touched it, for sure you touched it, but you don't know if that was tummy or not. So over here also there's the din of Safik Tum Rishus Hayochid, Sveiki Tummy, and Safik Tum Rishus Harabim, Sveiki Torah, which is different than we had before. There was a Karen Oira that wanted to say that if there's a Safik, whether or not it was Tumah B'chlal, so you don't have the din of Safik Tum Rishus Hayochid, Sveiki Tommy. Legabi this din, there was a Rambam in the Gea, if it was Korsha, if the blood congealed, and there was the blood didn't congeal, if the Leichas Rucha didn't congeal, in Halacha Aleph in Pei Beis, the Notzel, which there was a suffix whether or not it came from the Basar or not, so the question is, if it's a suffix, why does the Rambam seem to say that it's not, that it's Torah? So it was a kasha l'chura. Why does the Rambam say it's Torah? So we mentioned the Mishnah L'melech. Mishnah L'melech says that the reason why it's Torah is because that was the halacha l'meish Messina, that not only vadi notzel is matami, not safik notzel. But the Karen Eira wanted to say that the pshat is that since it's a suffix, so it's a suffix, we go l'kula, and even the Rishus Hayochid, the suffix tum Rishus Hayochid, Sveiki Tomei, that's only if you know for sure it's Tomei. But if you don't know for sure it's Tomei, so you don't say suffix tum Rishus Hayochid, Sveiki Tomei. So in that, the Rambam Aruch points out to this Rambam over here in Halacha Yudalid, which shows us that's not like that. That L'chura, the Rambam says clearly that even if you have a suffix, whether it's tummy or not, so still the din of suffix tum Rishus Hayochid is still there. That's still there. Yeah. There's a shtickle, also a ha'ara over here. The Rambam is speaking about the dam and natif, when we say kama bottle. Before we learned in the halacha before, where we were talking about that the dam tfusa means also that the blood came into the first the blood came out michayim, and then some of the blood came out mimisa, and that's called dam tfusa. So there's a difference in how the blood came out. Over here it was mitaftev tipa. So tipa is say kama bottle. Mashiach over there, the blood came out, it flowed out. In other words, it came out as a flow. So Memela, you don't say that it becomes bottle. In other words, it could be also that it was mechuber, it was mechuber to the dam which is in the mess. So Memela, you're not going to say that this dam became bottle. So therefore, this dam is a mixture of the dam that came up in Achai and the dam that came up in a mess, and therefore the din is that it has a din midrabanan and there has a din tumah. Halacha tezvov, hakever. Now, when the Rambam speaks about kever, we'll see also behemshach. We're talking about like a structure. It's not talking about the kever as we know it, where the kever is in the ground. Because if it's not shachas, we're talking about the size of the kever. You're touching the size of the kever. We're talking about there's a structure over the ground that's completely closed from all sides, and inside this structure, which is mechuba lekarka and closed, there is a mess. That's what a kever is. Is a kever kolzman shatumim b'teichet, that the mess is inside this kever, is metame b'maga u'be'oil. So the kever itself is metame b'maga by touching the kever from the sides, and also be'oil by being over the kever. By being over the kever itself is the din of tumah. Kimes din teira. Minatera, the kever has the din of a mess. Shenemer eba mess, eba etzem oder eba kever. So the kever itself has the din of a mess. If a person touches the gag of the kever, now if a person touches the gag of the kever and his hand is on top of the gag of the kever, so the pashtus he's being mal ala kever. His hand is being mal ala kever, and if his hand is being mal ala kever, he doesn't have to touch it. He's mitami tumas meis. So here we're talking about he's touching the side of the gag shel kever. In other words, there's the wall of the kever and there's the gag shel kever, and he's touching the side of the gag shel kever. Ve'echad negeh b'gag shel kever. Where he's touching the walls, so then the kever has a din of a mess, and memela he's metame either by touching it or being ma'il out. It has to be built. It was mechuba lekarka and also closed from all sides. And only then is this kever, after it was built and it's closed, yekule metame b'mago beil. Then it's metame side b'mago side beil. He just makes a makeshift covering over the mess. Over here, we're not talking about a structure, which is mechuba lekarka. We're talking about a makeshift structure, which is next to the mess. And he made things on the side, things again which are portable. And then on top of it, he covered it with kelim or avonim b'keitzim. So this covering, which is on top of the mess, which again is a temporary covering, that's nikra geil. That's called the geil. That's called doifik, because the geil bangs on it, so it's called doifik. Ushneim hageil le'adoifik is metamin b'mago be'oil kekever. They're also metamin b'mago be'oil kekever, just like a kever is metamin b'mago be'oil. So they're also metamin. V'tumas midivri sefer, and their tumah is midivri sefer. It's midrabanan. In other words, a kever is metamin, like the Rambam started off. The kever is metami dintera, because the pasuk says a bemes, a batzamadam, a becover, and the geil and the defik, which is a makeshift kever. It's not a kever mamish because it's not mechuba lekarka. It doesn't have that permanence. Nevertheless, it's metami midrabanan. The geil and the defik are metami midrabanan. The tumasim divri sefer, ve'ena metami b'masa, and the geil and defik are not metami b'masa. So, but again, the oil. So again, by an oil. Notice something which is the kever mamish doesn't pass to talk about masa. Whereas the whole gather of the kever is mechuba lekarka. How can it be masa? Mashengan over here, when we're talking about something that's portable, so l'chura there could be masa. Notice you start pulling off the geil. You start pulling off the geil. So l'chura you're carrying the geil. You're moving the geil. So that's what the Rambam is saying. Ve'ena metamim b'masa. The geil and the defik are not metamim b'masa. L'fichach im gorer hageil b'chavolim. You schlepp the geil with chavolim. Shekisa beis hames, and through the chavolim you covered the mess. A gorer yeshamti mi'ala mes. The geil was already on top of the mess, and then you used a rope to schlepp it off the top of the mess. A shegorer adefik, or you schlepp the defik at shehemid olav hageil, until you put the geil on top of it. You put it like under the geil. A shamti b'chavolim mitachas hageil, or you schlepped away the defik from where it was. So all of these things are raised at Torah. So it's a Torah. No, the geil and defik is only metame b'maga u'be'oil. They're not metame b'masa. The pashtat one, when you start pulling it away, so it becomes always geil and defik. When you're pulling it to it, so the churrit also didn't really yet become a geil and defik. Although you could say that it's already a geil of the defik, and now you're schlepping it. I'll quote upon him, the din is that a geil of the defik is not metame b'masa. It's only metame b'maga u'be'oil, which is similar to a mess. Was similar to a kever rather. Now, udvarim sheseimchen es adefik. If you have a defik, and now there's defik, in order to support the defik itself, the defik are the two walls which are on the side of the mess, which are supporting the goil, which is on top of that. So you have something which is supporting the defik. You're supporting the defik. Ve'eman nikroim defik defkim. That's like the defik of the defik. Is areim teherim. There's no tumah. The Rabbanan never instituted tumah on those the defik defkim. Halacha tezayim. Soda shenachrish bo kever. You had a kever buried in a field, and now you went ahead and plowed this field. And Memela, so the bones of this mess got lost in the rest of the field because the plow dug into the ground, so it schlepped some of the bones. So some of the bones could have been spread over the entire field. Soda shenachrish bo kever v'avdu atzmis hames ba'afra, and the bones of the mess are lost in the offer. Is hiya nikraz beis hapras. That field is referred to as being a beis hapras. Va'afra mitame b'magu b'masa, and the offer of that soder is mitame b'magu b'masa because of the concern shem yesh be'etzem kaseira. So in other words, we're not choishes that there's an etzem which is more than a seira. In other words, to be mitame b'oil, which would have to be a reiva hakav, but rather we're worried that maybe there's an etzem kaseira. But ve'enu mitame b'oil, it's not mitame b'oil. V'chein kol artzus ha'amim. The din that the eretz ha'amim is mitame, afra mitame b'magu b'masa. The offer of Eretz Ha'am is Metame b'Magov Masa. Why? Also for the same reason. People, they're in Eretz Ha'am, they're not careful about the Atzomis, and therefore there's a concern that maybe in the Eretz of the Eretz Ha'amim, the offer of the Eretz Ha'amim, there's bones over there, and those bones are Metame even b'Keseira. The Tumas Meis Hapras, Eretz Ha'am, Medivri Seifrim, Kimeshi Yizbo. This is the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon instituted this chashash of Sai b'negei Tumas Beis Hapras, and of there is Tumas Eretz Ha'am.